All right, I was really excited to be invited to speak here today. I love talking about hiring. I kind of geek out on it the way some people geek out on engineering or accounting or building things. So like Dawn mentioned, we work with over 200 different companies. And as a recruiter, I get to sort of peek behind the curtain, if you will, as to what helps some of our clients be really successful in landing the talent that they're looking for, and then some of the baubles they make that cost them that top choice candidate. And it is no secret to any of you that the labor market is very tight. So my goal today is to give you some tips, tricks, and strategies that will help you be more successful in building your organizations. I'm going to go over a lot of different things. Don't feel like you need to completely reinvent the hiring wheel for your company. Pick 2 or maybe 3 things that I've talked about and apply those. And if they work, take 2 or 3 more and add that to the mix. But you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Oftentimes, just little quarter turns are what make the difference. All right, so today, I'll talk a little bit about labor market trends and some of the things we see going on with the market. And I'm going to spend the bulk of my time talking about what are some of those winning strategies that will help you grow your organization. Just out of curiosity, how many people here enjoy the hiring process? You look forward to interviewing, onboarding? Okay, nobody. Me. And how many people find it like the necessary evil? Yes, I have to do this again. Anybody? Okay. All right, well, I happen to find a lot of fun in doing it, and I think if you are intentional about building a good process, it can be a much more enjoyable experience. Current labor market. We're a long way off from those days. This is one of my favorite charts to show business leaders because I think it can help you feel a little better about the climate that we're in. If we're looking at this side of the chart, this is how many unemployed people there were for every 1 job opening. So in the height of the recession in 2008-9, there were almost 6.5 unemployed people for every 1 job opening. Did that just blink off? Okay. So if you remember hiring then, some of us are old enough to remember newspaper ads. You would put out a newspaper ad and you would get all these applications, or maybe you had a website with online applications. You could take as long as you wanted to make an offer. You could have a 6-step interview process that took 2 months and you would still get a good candidate. You could even make a low-ball offer to an overqualified candidate and make a successful hire. It was what we call an employer's market. Fast forward to where we are at about 2017, we start to hit a 1-to-1 ratio. So for every 1 open job, there's about 1 unemployed person. This does not represent industry. So for example, there might have been 3 openings for an RN for every 1 unemployed RN. Or if you think about a civil engineer or an architect, it was already less than 1-to-1, but just raw numbers. 2020 happens, and we see this big spike in unemployment, but it was really short-lived. By 21, until where we are now, we've got almost 2 open jobs for every 1 unemployed person, I should add to this, looking for work. So we are now in what's called a job seeker's market. The job seeker has the upper hand. How many of you have had candidates with multiple offers or an employer who counter-offered? Yes? Everybody, I see a lot of shaking heads. So essentially, candidates, it's starting to cool a little bit now, but they could almost create a bidding war where they would go out and interview 3 or 4 places and get 2 or 3 offers, and then they would sort of play the employers off of each other to see if they could increase it a little bit. Not a bad strategy on their part, can't blame them for doing it, but it's not real fun when you're sitting in the employer seat and this is going on. I thought this was an interesting statistic. I don't hear this as much as I used to, but I still hear from employers, oh, I just want someone to come and stay with my company, for at least 10 years and just really learn what we do and stick around. Turns out your best chance of getting that is hiring someone towards the end of their career that's looking for one last move. Your younger professionals are still exploring the world of work. They tend to move much more quickly. It's cooling a little bit, but numbers show the best way to get a raise or an increase in pay is actually to switch jobs, not to stay where you are. I think employers are starting to catch up on that a little bit, but the numbers are all over the board. Some places will say 7 to 10% increase if you switch jobs, and maybe about a 6% increase annually if you stay where you are. So something to think about if you're thinking about raises for your teams is, am I staying competitive? If they hop on Indeed or ZipRecruiter or LinkedIn and look for a job, what are my competitors going to offer them? And am I keeping up with what they're worth to me? But just in general, we're not seeing the longevity. We're seeing people be much more mobile in their careers. By the time they're in their mid-30s, they're starting to maybe more settle into a rhythm. You can break this cycle within your own company, but just be aware of sort of the national trend. So this slide is really built on what candidates are telling my team every day on the phone. Like I said, or like Dawn mentioned, I do with my team this thing called the beat on the street. So every other week when we have a recruiter team meeting, I'm like, what are the candidates saying? What are the employers saying? Who's moving? Why are they moving? And that's where I'm getting this insight from. We don't all like to think about it this way because we want people to join our teams for more than just money. But better pay is often the number one reason people move, especially if you're thinking about your hourly workers. Inflation has hit them extra hard. So, if they're trying to buy a house or they've got car payments, their grocery budget is much, much higher. They're looking for opportunity to increase their income. Work-life balance has become a bigger and bigger issue, I think, especially since the pandemic and maybe especially with the younger workforce. How many people have found a hard time to get people to work overtime the last few years? Yes, nodding heads. We're just not seeing the hunger for overtime the way that we did 10, 20, 30 years ago. Fun thought there, I've seen some of my clients that are in construction or manufacturing related industries go to 4-10s. So Monday to Thursday, we're gonna do 10-hour days. Fridays are optional. So the people who want the overtime can have it. The people who don't want the overtime get to have a long weekend. So that's been a really nice solution that I've seen. Another way I've seen this play out more for office teams is, like, rather than saying you have to work 8 to 4:30, the company will give a window of time. Our office hours are going to be between maybe 6 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. You pick your 8 hours within that window. So for example, if you have a parent and their child plays sports, they could come in early, get off early, make it to the game. So there's some options there where you can maybe give people a little bit of balance back in their life. Growth opportunities and career advancement. I was checking out your website for PCI, and I noticed on your careers page you had some really cool graphics where it showed if you came in entry level, maybe you could be a team lead or a foreman or a project manager. Know what those trajectories are within your company. If we're going to talk about retention, the young generation especially, and really all generations, they don't want to come in and do the same job for 10 years or even 2 years most times. They want the opportunity to learn more skills, to advance, to grow. So if you have a career track within your company and you provide on-the-job training or certifications, highlight that for your existing team and also for the candidates that you're talking to. This is a tough one, right? Because most of your people have to be at your plants, right? Or because they're doing physical work. But your office staff, they want some of that flexibility. So, example, my next door neighbor is a mechanical engineer. She commutes 2 hours every Monday to her job. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, she works from home. She would never take that job if she had to go into the office 5 days a week. If you're able to offer some flexibility for some of your office positions, it expands your search radius for candidates out to, like I said, up to 2 hours. If people only have to commute in 1 or 2 days a week, they're willing to commute much, much further. So it not only benefits you in terms of talent acquisition, it's also a benefit to the candidate if there's someone who likes to work from home. So that is just something to consider. I know it's not practical for all positions, but if you can offer some flexibility, it is extremely sought after. If we have a job ad running that says remote or hybrid remote, we will get triple, quadruple the number of candidates for something that's in office 5 days a week. Stability. Anyone here, you can shake your head yes, like have companies in your area that are laying people off or have laid off over the last 6 months? Yes. Candidates, we're hearing candidates say, hey, we've noticed our company is really slowing down. One of the things I'm looking for is a company that's still going strong. So if you're booked out, like I have a solar company I work with, they're booked out for 2 years on commercial solar projects. So when I had the opportunity to represent them at a local career fair, that was one of the first things I told students. Hey, this is an industry where their future is bright. They are booked out for the next 2 years on projects. That's something to pay attention to when we have a lot of other industries that are feeling a little more squeeze from kind of a slowdown in some of their markets. So if you've got a bright future, make sure to highlight it. If you've been in business 20 or 30 or 40 years, that's another thing to highlight. Hey, we're here for the long haul, we're stable, we're involved. Positive team environment. I think we've heard people leave bosses, not jobs. Do you have team leads that are investing back in their people? I had a company we were recruiting for, and there was we were very successful with them except for one department. We kept having people turn down offers or take offers, and it was a rather entry-level position, but they kept quitting within the first couple weeks. And we're like, what? So I finally said to the HR person, what is going on here? And she said, oh, the boss is a jerk. Okay. Talk me through this. Well, the boss was, I forget, he was a cousin maybe of the owner, and they weren't allowed to fire him because he was family. And she said he's miserable to work for, and no one we put on his team sticks. Okay, noted. This explains a lot. So, meanwhile, the rest of the company had reasonably good retention, and people tended to stay and enjoy their work there, but that particular team had a toxic leader, and it really showed up in how the churn happened. So think about, and actually, I don't know if anyone's listened to Marcus Buckingham's Love Plus Workbook. Great book if you want to build a healthy company culture. But he said the culture of the team matters more to employees than the culture of the company. You can have a great company culture, but if you have teams that aren't functioning well, that's where you're going to see people discontented, disengaged, and really struggle with retention. Good values, ethical company. I can't tell you how many times I get on the phone with an employer and we're trying to figure out what's their hook, their marketing advantage when we were representing their job. And they do all this amazing community service work. They're sponsoring these local events or giving to these charities or doing projects for the community, but they don't talk about it. Like they just think, well, that's just what we do. That's just who we are. Okay, make sure your employees and your candidates know if you're a generous company. That can be a big magnet as well as a retention strategy. We're seeing a real awareness with young people that they want to know that your company cares and that you give back. It's maybe not something we thought about as much in the past, but it's becoming more and more common that candidates want to know. I've had candidates, we put something in the ad about some of maybe the local nonprofits, a business supports, and they will tell me, I applied for this job because I love that organization. I think it's so cool that they sponsor that. So don't take for granted the goodwill you're putting out into the community. All right. I'm going to pivot now. We're going to spend the bulk of our time talking about 5 specific strategies. Like I said, don't feel overwhelmed trying to think you have to do all of them. Pick a couple and make the change. I'm going to start with the most basic of things. Identify your target. I always say, how will you know if you found what you want if you haven't figured out what you want? So I have a lot of clients, they'll start interviewing candidates and they'll be like, I don't know which one to pick. And they didn't have clarity on the front end of what it was they were actually looking for. So real simple question, what does a typical day look like? Week, month, year? Some positions kind of cycle. There's a busy season and a slower season. Some positions you're busy all year long. It's pretty repetitive. What does this role look like? Another question you want to ask, how will I know if the person is successful? What does winning look like? So for example, for your sales team, maybe that's a metric of how many conversations they have every week. Or maybe for your accounting team, how that every bill is entered accurately and paid on time. For your production team, perhaps it's that they are cross-trained to use X number of pieces of equipment, or by 90 days they've gotten these certifications or trainings. So think through, when I hire a candidate, they're successful, what will it look like? Once we've identified the job, what kind of person fits that? That's that matchmaking piece I was talking about. Do you need someone that comes in, let's say if you're hiring a drafter, you want them to know certain things. But maybe there's some things you could teach them, for example, the specific software that you're using. And if you're going to say, yes, I can train them, do you have time to train them? Or does someone on your team have time to train them? Do you have the systems and processes in place to do that? I've had a lot of placements fail because the company thought, well, we can train somebody, but the candidate got in there and like everyone was full court press doing what they do, and no one had time to actually sit down and properly onboard them and train them. So be thinking realistically, you might like to train, do you have the bandwidth to pull it off? Are there any weaknesses in the team that need to be balanced out? Maybe you need someone, it's sales, and you need someone with connections in a particular region, or maybe it's your engineering team and there's a skill set you really need to find in your next hire. Values or culture fit. This is a little bit of a interesting topic for me. I'll often be on the phone and I'll ask my client, does your company have a vision, mission, value statement? And they'll say, oh yeah, we have one. I think we wrote it a couple years ago. I could probably find it and send it to you. So, that's okay. I don't think I need it. Whereas I get on the phone with some companies and they're like, yes, our mission statement is, our values are, and they know it. And that's the company where we definitely want to be hiring into those values. They're very clear on what they want. I have a client in lean manufacturing, and they are constantly quarter turning and making improvements and little changes, and they want someone who's very innovative and willing to experiment and always think, how can we do this better? So stick in the mud need not apply, right? You want to be somebody who, this is how we do it. This is not a company where you'll fit. So when we're marketing the job and we're interviewing candidates, we're thinking about how do we look for that trait in people. Personality type. If you are hiring an engineer or an accountant, you want someone extremely detailed and a little bit perfectionistic. You probably don't want that maybe in your salesperson. You want someone much more outgoing, verbal, a connector. So are there traits that we need to find? And also, what relevant industries can we pull from? So for example, maybe I shouldn't confess this, but I will. For some of my clients in industries like yours, I'm like, all right, well, let's say we're talking about your install crews. Who is working outside doing hard physical labor? Roofers, landscapers, exterior remodelers, pavers. So I'm not necessarily looking for a candidate that has experience specifically in concrete. I'm gonna look at candidates from a variety of backgrounds that are used to being outside and love working with their hands. So think a little bit broadly. What are your similar industries that your candidate might be living in that we could find somebody? And that leads us into point number 2, and there is a party going on out there. Market your job well. Do I have any marketing people in the room? Couple? Yes, okay. If you have an internal marketing team or even an agency you're working with, involving them in recruitment can be a really great strategy. A job description is not a job ad. And I'm gonna pick on you all a little bit. I was on some of your websites this morning. Last night on PCI's website, and I noticed that you have a job board on there, which is awesome. And it links back to all the different companies and the openings you have. A lot of you are taking your job description and posting that on your website. A job description is not a job ad. They are two totally different things. The job description is the cover your butt HR document that you need with all the right legalese in it to make sure you don't get sued because somebody didn't match. They're very, very important. I'm not downplaying the job description. It's very important, but that's an internal document. A job ad is a marketing piece. That's selling your company and selling the job itself to a candidate who's out there looking for work. I will give a lot of you compliments. The websites I checked out, a lot of you did have really nice career pages that highlighted unique things about your company. But what I did see was an awful lot of job descriptions posted that were more, like I said, kind of that dry HR document. So the first question your job ad needs to answer is, why would someone want to work for you? The other day I went in and I just wanted to see what was out there. I typed in production technician and there was pages and pages and pages of ads. What would make your company, when a candidate's out there looking, stand out? What would make them say, you know what, I'm gonna click apply for this one versus, I don't know, the 100 other ones that I could apply for? Also, what makes your specific job exciting? So in your industry, you are building the infrastructure of America. You are building bridges and parking garages and schools and hospitals. That's something kind of cool. Not everybody can say that about their job. So think about what would make a candidate interested in this, or this organization, for example, and all the training and certification and support someone can get to really build a career. What would make the job exciting, the industry exciting? What's going to make someone really connect with what it is that you're doing? You're going to want to be competitive. Like I said, one of the best things you can do before you start marketing your job is just hop on Indeed or ZipRecruiter or LinkedIn and type in the job title and just see what your competitors are doing, because that's who you're competing against. It might not be people in your industry. It might be people in a variety of industries, but what are they going to offer someone stepping into this role? Pay range, benefits, career path, perks. Like, for example, if you offer a company truck to your project manager or a company provided cell phone, also sign-on bonuses. I'm not seeing nearly as many of those the last 6 months as I saw the couple years prior, but it can be really useful if you need a very specific position filled. Write the ad with the candidate in mind. I was working on an activity to do with a business group I'm in, and that was actually why I was looking at production technician. And I thought, well, I want to find a good ad and a poorly written ad. The whole first page of Indeed results were all ads that were basically internal job descriptions posted to Indeed. So I just picked the first one I found. It took me to page 2 till I found a company that did this. They wrote the job ad to the candidate. The job ad isn't about you, it's about the candidate and what are they looking for and what can you offer that will meet that need or that passion inside of them. Job ads, they're often looking at them on their phone, so it's a tiny little device. Whatever your first sentence is in your job ad should be something exciting. What's the most interesting thing you can say about your company or the job that'll hook them in, keep them interested, get them to read the rest? Tell a story, make it interesting so they kind of feel like, I always say a good job ad will draw someone in or push someone out. So I have a client, we just started the search yesterday. They're seeing the change in the generation. They're seeing that they need managers that are mentors and coaches, not just top-down directive type leaders. So our first bullet point in their ad is something to the effect of, are you excited to lead a production team by coaching, mentoring, and developing your team? Some people will read that and say, yes, that is the kind of leader I want to be. And other people will read that and be like, I don't got time for that fluffy stuff. That's not my thing. And that's fine. We don't want them to apply. I don't need to take time to screen their resume. But that very first bullet point's a little bit polarizing. It'll draw the right person in. It'll repel the wrong person out. So think about that first point. Tell your story. SEO matters. So if you've got similar job titles, and you can use those job titles multiple times within the ad, that will help you rank better on these job boards. Bullet points, I still see some job ads that are paragraph texts. I will allow for like an about us paragraph, but everything else should be bullet pointed because once again, about 60% of job seekers are looking on their little device, and so it's just harder to read long text. You want those little bullet points. Advertise pay. Indeed tells you you'll get 30% more applicants. I'm going to tell you you'll get double or triple. One quick example, we had a client and they needed an office position filled. They were adamant we could not list the pay range. So we said, okay, we'll do it the way you want. We didn't list their pay range. Week 1 came in and we had filled other similar roles for other companies, so we knew how many candidates we should have. Week 1, we send our client an update. Hey, we're a week into the search. We've only had 10 people apply. One of them we've screened and sent, but you said she's not a match. Any chance you would be interested in adding the pay range? Nope, they didn't want to do it. Week 2, we had about 20 candidates. Same story. Would you like to add the pay range? Nope, they didn't want to do it. Okay. Week 3, same story. They finally say to us, all right, go ahead, add the pay range. Now, any normal job ad we run, the first maybe 1 to 2 weeks is when we get the bulk of the applicants. We had 30 applicants in 3 weeks. We had over 60 in the very last week we were running their ads. We did find the right person, but candidates want to know that the job that they're applying for is going to meet their basic expenses, right? That they're going to be able to pay their mortgage and their car payment and their insurance, whatever else they've got going on. They don't want to waste their time applying for a job that doesn't fulfill their family budget. So I'm a huge advocate, just put the pay range out there. There are certain circumstances where I get it, because you don't want your existing employees to see that, in which case you've got a different problem. You should not be hiring new people in at more than you're paying your current team. That's why people leave, going back to the whole retention issue. So I understand it gets complicated, but advertise pay range if at all possible. You'll get so many better candidates. Casting a wide net, definitely open up, all of your positions should be opened up to your team first. Do you all have employee referral programs? Yeah, good, okay. If you don't, you should. Your employees, they should love working for you and they should be excited, and you should reward them if they do bring in someone they know to your company. I call Indeed the evil empire. I don't know any organization I've ever worked with that has worse customer service than Indeed. I kind of joke with my team, if they ever find me dead on the floor from a heart attack or a stroke, check my call history. I was probably talking to Indeed. That is how much I dislike them. However, as far as job boards go, they have at least 80, if not 90% market share. You have to advertise your jobs on Indeed. You just have to. I'm sorry, they're miserable to work with, I know. But the candidates use them. They have wonderful marketing, some really bad business ethics in my opinion, but they own the market. Social media posts can be helpful if you have a good social media preference. A $50 or $100 boost on a Facebook ad can really get your job in front of a lot of people. Also worth considering, LinkedIn would be next, in my opinion, to Indeed. So if you have the opportunity to do paid ads on LinkedIn for your sales, your management, your engineering type roles, Indeed's a great resource. I put ZipRecruiter on here because they have really snazzy marketing. I personally did not see results with them. I kind of joke with my clients. I ran in 2022 a $40,000 experiment with ZipRecruiter to get 2 additional hires. That was not a good return on investment, let me tell you. I have talked to a couple people recently that have tried ZipRecruiter. They didn't. And I was spending that much money because we were running like 100 job ads, so that was spread out. But they didn't have results with ZipRecruiter either. But depending on what you're using for your HRIS system, sometimes it'll push out to ZipRecruiter for free. You should definitely take advantage of the free ads because why not? I would be careful with the paid on ZipRecruiter. Industry job boards, like the one you have with PCI, very helpful. And also college job boards. So if you're looking for an engineer or someone in accounting or drafting, go ahead and take advantage of your local colleges and any job boards or career fairs that they might offer. All right, so we've identified what we wanted. We've thought about marketing it. I felt bad for Trevor. He had to have breakfast with me, and I think all I did was ask you questions. I'm not sure if you got to eat your food while it was still hot. I realized after the fact. But great interview questions are really key. You only get, depending on how many interviews you do, maybe between an hour and 3 to 4 hours with the candidate. So you want to make sure that you're making the most of those minutes. So what questions can you ask that'll really assess, is it the right person for my company and the job? When you prepare your interview questions in advance, you're going to be able to compare them much more easily. So if you've got Sally, Bill, and Sharon, and you ask them pretty much the same questions, you can stack their answers against each other and make an assessment. It also will help you stay on track with the interview. It's very easy to get off on bunny trails, especially, and I know I have a lot of salespeople in this room. Y'all, we are talkers. So it's very easy for an interview to go any which direction and never actually get to the heart of what the interview team needs to know about. So having them plan ahead of time will really focus the time that you have. You want to build questions around different areas. So we're going to start with skills. Once again, maybe they need to know a certain software, maybe they need to know how to use certain equipment, things like that. Personality, I do like to flesh that out a little bit. You don't want someone like me doing your accounting. Very bad at it. I'm not very detailed. Culture fit. So once again, when I mentioned my client that does lean manufacturing, I know that I need to build interview questions to that effect. Short and long-term goals. So one of the questions we love to ask is, what are 3 things you're looking for in your next job? And then we'll follow that up with what interested you about this one. Sometimes our clients will answer, or our candidates will answer with things that don't line up with the job or don't line up with the company. And then we have to have a discussion with the candidate. Well, hey, is this really maybe the right job for you? I can think of an accounting firm that hired, no, sorry, I take that back. An IT firm that hired a young man whose dream was to be an accountant. Well, he only lasted a year. If they had bothered to ask him, like, what are you looking for in your next job? Where do you see your career going? He would have been honest and told them, but they never thought to ask. So it's a good thing to flesh out. And of course, team player. I know I've got at least one Lencioni fan in the room. Patrick Lencioni has a wonderful book called The Ideal Team Player. And there's a whole section of that book that talks about how to interview for team player traits. That's really, really helpful. But he talks about humble, hungry, and smart. And by smart, he means like interpersonal skills, not necessarily IQ. Consider the type of position, entry level versus advanced. Your higher level candidates should be able to answer higher level questions. if you've got a very entry-level candidate with maybe not a lot of work experience, they're not going to be able to answer some of the more in-depth questions. And ask different questions at different stages of the process. So we always set our deal breakers up first. Like, for example, let's say they have to drive your company truck to job sites or to visit customers. Do you have a valid driver's license and a reasonably good driving record? Well, actually, no, I've got some stuff on there. Okay, well, what is it? And then you find out this person can't be insured. Well, if you can't be insured, you can't drive the company vehicle and you can't do the job. So whatever those, or maybe it's how much they can lift. Maybe they have to lift 75 or 100 pounds. Ask that in the first 5 minutes of the conversation. You don't want to get an hour in and then find out like, oh, you're afraid of heights and this job requires you to be on a ladder. Okay, this is not going to work. So think about what your deal breakers are, put them in the front. You will save a lot of time doing it that way. Behavioral style interview questions. I'm a psychology nut. I love anything to do with psychology. Behavioral psychology says the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So if I can find out how a person acted in the past, that'll give me an indicator of how they're going to act in the future with my company. So when you're asking your questions, we're going to ask for things that say, tell me about a time when. Give me an example of. Can you share an experience where? So rather than asking hypothetical questions like, how would you handle an upset customer? Or how would you work with an underperforming employee? How do you think you would respond if you made a mistake? Or how do you stay organized to meet deadlines? We're going to ask, tell me about a time when you had to work with an upset customer and how you handled them. Funny story about this one. I was interviewing for a customer service role and I asked this question. The man I was interviewing had been in customer service at a theater for 5 years. So you would think this man would have hundreds of stories of upset customers that he had to navigate. I asked him this question and this is what he tells me. Well, it was a Friday and I had a customer call in. They were supposed to come to the show that night. They were traveling in from out of town and they got delayed. They weren't going to make the show. So he wanted me to switch his ticket to Saturday. We didn't have any openings for our Saturday show. So he got very angry with me. And our tickets were non-refundable, so I couldn't give him a refund. I said, okay, so what did you do? Well, I laughed at him, and then he hung up on me. 2 things are running through my mind. First of all, dude, your emotional intelligence, I'm seriously questioning right now. You've been doing this for 5 years, and that's the story you told me to land a job. No. And then second, I'm like, and then he laughed about it. He was like, ha, 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 it was so funny. And I'm like, this isn't even like a mistake that you made that you're like, I wish I would have. Like, you think you did it right and you think it's really funny. And that is not what my client wants for a customer service rep. But I'm pretty sure if I'd asked him that hypothetical question of how would you handle an upset customer, he would have given me that canned, whatever his training manual told him to say. Describe an underperforming employee that was on your team and how you address their performance. I actually like to ask for a winning example and then an example where you couldn't change someone and what did you do about them. I had a warehouse manager, 10 years experience, tell me, well, I never really had an employee that I couldn't coach up. And I'm like, you're working in a distribution center with like really entry-level people, and in 10 years, you never had a problem employee that you couldn't fix. So I was like, well, either he's lying, but he didn't really seem like a liar, or you're superhuman and you're just amazing at influencing people, and that didn't really land either. Or he had an incredible tolerance for poor performance and just wouldn't fire anyone. And that's what I concluded, like interacting with him. He seemed like such a nice man. But I thought, goodness, in 10 years, you never had an employee you couldn't fix or that you had to let go or move to another department. Like, I just didn't buy it. Tell me about a mistake you made at work and how you handled it and what you learned from it. Describe a large project you were working on and how you stayed organized to meet the deadline. So those are some examples of how you can evoke a story out of someone. I promise you, when you start asking these questions, 2/3, if not 90% of candidates will start out with, well, if I have an employee that's underperforming, this is what I like to do, and then they blah, blah, blah. And I always, as soon as they take a breath, I say, okay, can you give me an example of a specific employee? So it does take some redirecting. People tend to answer you hypothetically at first, but if you redirect them, usually by the second or third question, they kind of catch on like, okay, this lady's gonna make me tell a story. I might as well just roll with it. All right, so we've identified what we wanted, how to market it, what questions we're gonna ask. Autopilot your interview process. I think for some of you, maybe the stress around hiring is that you don't have a plan for it and you're not sure, maybe every time you do it a little bit differently. The question I like to answer in this labor market where candidates are getting multiple offers and getting them fast is how fast can we get through this interview process and still be effective, right? We don't want to go so fast that we miss important information and we hire a jerk, but we also don't want to go so slow that every candidate we like gets hired by someone else first. Here's some things you're going to think through. How many interviews are you going to do? Is this like a Zoom interview and an in-person? Is it a phone call and an in-person? Is it 2 in-persons or 3 in-persons because it's a management role and it's really critical? Who is going to be involved? Who is doing what parts of the interview process? What's your timeline? So for example, let's say you get notice from an employee that in 3 months they're retiring. Let's say it's a project manager. So Sharon is retiring in 3 months. Okay, you could start the interview process right away in hopes that there's overlap between Sharon and this new person and she could spend, maybe up to 2 months, 6 weeks training. Or you might look at your company budget and say, well, I can't really afford 2 project managers for 2 months. So maybe if I could just get someone like 2 weeks before Sharon leaves. And then you got to kind of think, well, how long is it going to take me to find this person and think backwards? So maybe you wait a month to start running your ads. So kind of think about your timeline, or maybe you have a new building going up. So you want to think, okay, well, when should I start hiring if I need more production help or more office help moving into this new space? References. Quick thought on references. I have had some really poor candidates that turned out really poorly that had amazing references. They just knew the right people to ask. But what has never ever worked out is when I asked for references and the candidate like hem-hawed around and wouldn't provide them. It's kind of like, wait a second, you can't think of 3, we actually asked for 4 people that will say nice things about you. That's a red flag. The other thing that will happen is we'll get them back, or we'll get the references from the candidate, and not a single person will call us back. If Bill is such a great guy, you should be really happy to provide a reference for him and talk about how awesome he is and how this company should hire him. But if no references will call you back, it's almost always a sign that they have nothing good to say. So that to me is almost more valuable than the good references, is when I don't get them, it's like, don't move forward, this is gonna be a problem. And also think through, are there any assessments you want to do, whether it's a personality assessment or skill assessment? Is there any testing, like a pre-employment physical or a drug test that you want to run ahead of time? And sort of plan out, like, okay, how are we doing this? Who is doing this? This is a sample. This is the one we most often run through with our clients. Advertise the position, review the resumes, reach out to promising candidates within 24 hours. So our goal as a recruiting team, knowing that people move fast, is from the time they apply until they've gotten a call or an email from my team to set up that first phone interview, we want to turn that around within 24 hours. We don't want them sitting for 3 or 4 days or a week or 2 weeks. We like to do a phone screen first. We have found a quick phone call going over our deal breaker questions will spend hours and hours of time spent sitting in person in an interview. It's amazing what you can find out in a 15 to 20 minute phone call. In-person interview with the team. For some of my clients, for their very entry-level positions, they are doing on-the-spot offers. It's one thing when you've interviewed 300 people for an entry-level production role versus when you're trying to hire, say, someone for your marketing team. So it does depend what the role is, but sometimes if it's something where you know what you're looking for in that interview, don't be afraid to do an on-the-spot offer. Checking references, if you're going to add that step, potentially a second interview, make a decision, extend the offer. And then this is just so important. Please, please, please notify the candidates not hired. Especially as the market's shifting, or if you've got some candidates that were recently laid off, we're seeing layoffs more so in office positions. We're not seeing, like, the skilled market is not any more open than it was 2 years ago, at least as far as I can tell, but we are seeing some office positions be eliminated. Or maybe they know their company is doing layoffs and they don't want to get caught up in that. Have the courtesy to let them go so they can continue their search. They've invested hours looking at your website, researching who you are, reading your reviews, coming prepared to the interview. They probably took a day off work to get there. Have the professional courtesy to close that loop for them. It is a common thing we hear from job seekers that they're so frustrated about, is I interviewed with this company a month ago and I haven't heard anything. And that breaks down a ton of trust. And sometimes those candidates are people that maybe you would consider for another opening. Maybe they weren't the best person for that position, but you're thinking, oh, well, if this comes up, they'd be a good fit. When you don't circle back and close the loop, you break all trust with them. And you really damage that relationship. So I cannot emphasize that enough. Please have kindness and notify the people not hired. None of us like to make that call or send that email, but it's way kinder than just letting them wonder what might have happened. The value of team interviews. How many of you, if you don't mind raising your hands, do team interviews versus just the hiring manager? Okay, it's a mixed bag. Then I will take time to make the case. You're going to get to see how the candidate interacts with different types of people. Quick example, one of my clients was hiring for a sales rep, and they do team interviews. And the candidate didn't know it, but the first part of their interview is actually how that person interacts with the receptionist when he shows up. So the candidate came in, and I'm here for my interview, and really didn't make any small talk or give the receptionist the time of day, kind of was on his phone, like it just not very friendly towards her. Now, of course, when the interview team came to the entryway to get him, he lit up and he was Mr. Personality and he was so excited. And so they went through the interview. He interviewed really, really well. But after he left, they said to the receptionist, okay, how did your interaction with him go? And she said, actually, he came across as really arrogant, dismissive, and didn't give me the time of day. Game over. They were like, we don't want a sales rep like that. We want someone who values all people, who treats all people with care. He was obviously very excited to see us, but didn't think you were important. Not our kind of guy. But if they hadn't asked her opinion, and this is their standard practice, but if they hadn't asked her, they would never have gotten that valuable feedback. And anyway, I think he had an arrogance problem. You're going to get better buy-in from your team. So if HR or maybe one of your managers hires someone and hands it to your team lead and says, here's your new employee, that's a totally different scenario than saying, hey, Mr. Team Lead, why don't you come sit on an interview and have some input onto the people you're going to work with. That team lead, those coworkers, that team are going to be way more bought in when you get to share with that, or when they get to share in the interview process, even if it's just for 15 or 20 minutes, they're the person giving the tour. Really think about how can I involve more people in this process? Or maybe one of the people, let's say it's your marketing team. Maybe one of the people on the marketing team is the person to do the phone screen. Even just that 15 minutes involves them in the process. It's also helpful to the candidate to interact with future coworkers. And lastly, you will have someone to take notes. Please, if you don't take notes now and you're going to make a quarter turn, make this one. When you're interviewing multiple people, it is so easy to forget who said what. Take some notes during the interview so that when you're comparing 2 or 3 people, you can be accurate in your memory of what they said. All right, last topic, and this is a big one. We're going to focus on the candidate experience. So a lot of what we've been talking about has been kind of focused on your end of it. Now we want to think, how is the candidate going to see this process? We'll talk about the interview, the offer, and the onboarding. I encourage my clients to think about candidates the same way you would think about customers. If you wouldn't treat a customer that way, please don't treat the candidate that way. Employees are your first customers. How you treat them, even at this early stage of building the relationship, is going to tell them how you expect them to treat their teammates and your customers. And how you treat them during the interview process clues them in as to what it might be like to work for you. So if you are disorganized, if you are late, if you are a poor communicator, if you tell them you'll get back to them on Friday and you don't get back to them until Tuesday, all those things say, well, this company is not going to be a great place to work. And it's a relationship that you want to build with them, because one of the 5 or 10 or 15 people that you interview are going to be on your team, and you want to start that relationship off strong. Scheduling the candidate. So that's kind of your first point of interaction, whether you're scheduling a phone screen or you're scheduling an in-person interview. We'll say it's an in-person interview. Offer a variety of times. Remember, in this labor market where there's not a ton of unemployed people at the moment, most of your candidates have jobs. What you don't want to do is say, can you come in at 1 o'clock on Thursday? Come on. They're going to take the whole day. They're going to have to use a whole PTO day just to make your interview. Can you offer them early in the morning, late in the afternoon? Maybe they have to make an excuse to their boss why they're coming in late or why they're going to leave early, but that's a lot easier to navigate than taking the whole day off. My favorite is when it's like Monday and my client will say, do you think we can get this candidate in on Wednesday at like noon? And I'm like, what are they supposed to tell their boss? Like, how are we going to make that happen? I mean, I guess they could call in sick, but then they're not really an honest person, so I don't like that either. So be thoughtful about the interview times you offer. It's also helpful in this day and age, if you have a lot of candidates you're considering, to offer it via Zoom, because it's easy enough for them to slip out to their car and take an hour lunch and do it then. It gives them a little more flexibility than having to plan travel time and all of that. When you reach out to schedule, my team, we call it the trifecta approach. We start out with an email with a link to the recruiter's calendar to schedule our phone interview. If we don't hear back from that email, we will then, typically we go to text messaging next. That seems to work best. And if we don't get a response to the text, if it's a promising candidate, we will try by phone before we give up on them. I have so many clients that only do one of those things, typically email or voicemail. The issue with email, if I had $1 for every time a candidate told the recruiter, well, I didn't get an email from that company, are you sure? And then we say to them, check your spam folder. And sure enough, the email inviting them to interview ended up in a spam folder that they didn't check. Or especially, and I can even be guilty of this a little bit, we find that younger candidates don't always check voicemails or don't always even set up their voicemails. So if you're only leaving a voicemail, there's a good chance it might get lost in the shuffle. I don't know, I have to get between 5 and 10 spam calls a day some days. Usually offshore, in my case, offshore recruiting agencies, but it gets exhausting. So, it's easy for one way to get missed, but if you're trying all 3 ways, especially if it's a candidate you're excited about, don't just stop at one. This is another important one. Let's say you do it verbally or even by email, follow up with a calendar invitation. In that calendar invitation, you want to include the address. If you have a big facility where you've got multiple entrances or different places to park, make sure they know where to park, where to go, who to ask for. Tell them who the interview team is going to be. I had a young professional, it was an office position she was applying for. And she thought she was interviewing with the HR rep, and it turned into like a 5-person panel interview that she was not expecting. And her feedback afterwards was that she felt very, very, very nervous when she realized she was sitting down with all these individuals and didn't kind of mentally prepare for that. So if you do a team interview, just give the candidate a heads up. I like to say, hey, we bring our team into the interview. We want you to meet some of our team, and we like them to meet you. Kind of softens that up a bit. Okay. Do not cancel or reschedule the interview unless you absolutely have to. And by absolutely have to, I mean your building is on fire. You have to. Excuses for canceling the interview do not include, I got caught up on a project, I'm sick, my kid is sick, we have a work emergency. If you've taken my advice, you have an interview team, let them carry on without you. Even if you're the key person making the decision, let the interview happen. So as I mentioned, a lot of times people are taking off of work. And so I've even had situations where the candidate showed up and no one called them to tell them that it had to be canceled. It's like, all right, you took off work, you drove there, and now your interview is not going to happen. Like, get someone to pinch hit for you, make the interview happen, do not reschedule it. No, it's one thing if the interview's a week out, maybe, but if it's the day before or the day of, just figure it out. I have had situations where the key manager couldn't be there last minute, and I get it, stuff happens. Then schedule a Zoom interview in an evening to get to meet them that way. Or if you really have to meet them in person, meet them in a coffee shop somewhere close to where they are. Make it super easy to get that interaction. But I have so many stories about that going really bad. And candidates just saying, well, they don't respect my time, so I'm not interested in the job, even though they were like the best candidate for the job. This is my personal tip. It's up to you if you think it's worth it or not. I like to text either the day before or the morning of the interview, or email if you've been communicating that way. You'll get one of 3 responses. You send out a message like, hey, really excited to meet you later today. Just want to confirm you're coming. You'll get a few people that'll write back and they'll be like, yes, so excited, can't wait for the interview. You'll get a handful that say, I'm so sorry, I just took another offer, I'm not coming, which is great, now you have a heads up. Or you'll get maybe a quarter of them that don't respond at all. It's possible they just didn't have time, but if they don't respond at all, have a plan B for that hour of your life. You're gonna have about 50-50 odds that they show up. But it's really nice the ones that text back and confess that they're not coming, because then you don't have to print out everything and have everything ready and set up the conference room and all of that. So I do think it's really worth that heads up text or email. Prepare the interview room. Do not forget to do this. Do not have pizza boxes from your lunch meeting still on the interview table when you take the candidate in there. Yes, this has happened. Introduce the interview team. Make sure they're familiar with who's sitting in the room and why. There's 2 schools of thought on interviewing. Chuck Blakeman has some opinions on this. He's someone I've read some of his work. He thinks that you should stress candidates out. Like an interview should be like being in the pressure cooker and just see what they come up with. I tend to take the other approach. I like to help them feel at ease and relaxed, because I think it's amazing what people will tell me because I'm friendly and warm and unassuming. And they will say things in an interview that you would never imagine someone would say in an interview. Like, Mr. I like to laugh at my customers. Yeah, I think if you can help them feel relaxed, remember, an interview is essentially a person saying, I want a seat on your team, and you and maybe 2 or 3 other people, just to use a word that no one likes, judging them. You're sitting there judging them. Do you have the right skills? Do you have the right personality? Do you have the right values? Are you going to be the right person? That's super stressful for people already. You do not need to intimidate them any further by, coming in big and bravado. Just have a conversation. Help them relax a little bit. I remember interviewing one guy. I would have been in my mid-30s. He was probably in his mid-50s. So and he had a very accomplished career. So I had no business interviewing him. He was brilliant. But he had worked for one company for 20 years. It got sold. He got laid off and was unemployed for the first time in a long time. He was so nervous talking to me, his hands were shaking. And I was like, oh man, I'm not even scary. But that's how stressed out he was being unemployed at the stage of the career he was at. So just help people breathe a little bit when they're with you. This is super hard for me because I am a talker, but be okay with silence. I have learned certain personality types like to think before they speak. So if you're a person who's a planner and you're someone who's a little more reserved, a little bit more of an introvert, interviews are doubly terrifying for you because you can't prepare. You don't know what you're going to be asked. You don't know what the interview team is going to be like. So they're already like nervous beyond nervous, and now they've got to provide these on-the-spot answers when there's someone who normally internalizes before they speak. So if I sense I have a candidate like that, I will say to them, hey, some of these interview questions are pretty in-depth. If you need to, take a minute or two, gather your thoughts, and then feel free to answer. We're okay with you taking a pause. And then they're like, okay. They know I'm not expecting for like an immediate fire back answer. So if you have someone like that you're interviewing, if you're interviewing for accountants, there's a good chance they're gonna want that type of space. But then you actually have to be okay with the silence. I have had to sit for about 2 minutes while a candidate thought through their answer, which to me feels like 2 hours, but they gave a really great answer. Don't forget to require specific examples. Once again, have a note taker. And even if you've prepared your interview questions ahead of time, don't be afraid to seek clarity. So I was interviewing it was a production manager position, and the candidate was on paper perfect. Had the right certifications, the right experience, the right years of experience. I was like, this is gonna be our guy. We were maybe 15 minutes into the interview. I just had this feeling, this sinking feeling. The company I was recruiting for was very down to earth, very humble, very team oriented. And this guy just had a bit of an edge. So it wasn't in my list of questions, but I said to him, all right, Peter, tell me about a time you made a mistake at work and how you handled it. He looks at me and he goes, I don't make mistakes. What? Okay. You're 15 years into your career and you've never made a mistake at work. All right. So another interview strategy for you. If you don't get the answer you're looking for the first time, reword it and ask again. So I said, okay, well, we all have days at work that don't go like we planned. So tell me about a day where things went off kilter and how you worked your way through it. So he told me a story about a time his coworker messed up, didn't close something, product spilled all over the floor. He took time off what he was doing, helped his coworker clean it up before their supervisor came through. Wasn't he the hero of his own story? I kind of fast-tracked the rest of the interview. He left. I called my client and I was like, hey, that candidate Peter that you and I thought was the one, you're not gonna like him. You're not gonna like him. He's not the one. So don't be afraid if something seems just a little bit off to go down and dig a little deeper. Wrapping up your interview, make sure you thank the candidate. I always like to open it up with, is there anything you would want to share with us that you haven't had the opportunity to share that we didn't think to ask about? Let them ask you questions. Good candidates will come with at least a couple of questions. They should be interviewing you back to a point. Let them know what next steps are. So for example, we do have 3 or 4 other candidates we are considering. You're our first interview, so it will be at least a week and a half before we're able to make a decision about who's going on to the next round. Do give them a timeline for getting back to them, and please honor it. You do not want them sitting for days past that deadline thinking that you're not interested in them. All right, so let's talk about offer. You want to give yourself the best possible chance of getting a yes. I'm going to say I learned a lot about this from one of my clients in the solar industry. Their HR person just nails it with presenting offers. By the way, all that stuff you did with the interview and the way you handled the candidate there, you want them to get to this point in the search just hoping and hoping and hoping that they get an offer from you. If they've interviewed 3 or 4 places, you want them sitting there thinking, gosh, I hope I get an offer from them because that's the one I want. So hopefully you've set them up really well to get to this point. Lowell taught me that you always present the offer verbally. And you don't just call up and say, I'm calling to offer you the position. You say something like, hey, Dawn, I want you to know that the interview team decided unanimously that you are the best person for this job. You're a great alignment with our company values. We love your experience in leadership and training, and we want you on our team. So I'm going to talk you through your offer. As soon as we end this call, I'll send you everything in writing. But isn't that so much more personal than getting an email with an offer, right? So maybe they do get 2 or 3 offers, but boy, you made that connection, and they know why you want them, and they know you're excited. So don't just shoot an email. Get them on the phone. If you can't get them on the phone, at least leave a voicemail to the same effect. You want to build that relationship and that connection. Be sure to follow up with everything in writing. Funny story. It was not a hire that we helped him with, but one of my clients told me recently that he did an on-the-spot offer. It was a more entry-level position. And the person started, and the payroll specialist said, hey, what's his pay rate? He didn't remember what he told the young man. He's like, well, it was arranged between this and this, but I don't know what we agreed on. And he felt kind of sheepish going back to the individual. So he just went with the highest part of the range. And like, for all he knows, he negotiated $2 an hour less. Actually another situation, this was for a manager position. In discussions of it, there was talk about bonuses, but nothing was put in writing. The candidate remembered one thing. Now, this is after he's been with the company for 3 months. The employer remembered another thing. And so here you are, you have this high-performing employee saying, I thought you promised me, I don't know, we'll say it was a $5,000 bonus. And the employer's like, I thought it was $2,000. Well, now what do? It wasn't in writing. So it creates sort of this tension in a brand new employee on your team. So please, 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 actually, I could tell a lot of stories about that, but just make sure it's all documented. And I talked about this already. Show that enthusiasm. And when they accept the offer, that's another great time to make a phone call. If they email you back and say, I'm accepting, just, hey, I got your email. I just want to tell you again, we're really excited. Thank you so much. How many of you have had a candidate accept an offer and then not actually show up their first day of work? Has anyone seen that? Yes? Okay, a few of you. It's not uncommon even after they accept an offer for ABC company down the street that they interviewed with 2 weeks ago to put in an offer. And maybe it's better than yours. So even if they accept the offer, you still have a chance to lose them until they actually start, even after they start, but usually that's when the deal is sealed. So don't think, okay, the offer was signed, accepted, we're free and clear. You're not. Till they show up that first day, that first week, keep in communication. All right, what if they decline the offer? Please, if you like them, just call them or email them and say, hey, I was really disappointed you didn't accept our offer. Is there anything you were looking for that we didn't provide? Sometimes it is the simplest thing, like an extra week of paid vacation. And you're like, okay, we can negotiate that. Or $1 an hour more. Like, sometimes it's things that are so easily fixed. Just ask. If you can, make a better offer. If you can't, this is where it matters how you've handled all of your candidates, not just your top choice one. Maybe your plan B will work out, or one of the other runner-ups is still on the market and they'll accept your offer. All right, let's talk a little bit about onboarding. It is so important to be intentional about this. Onboarding is really, a lot of people focus on the first 3 months. It's how do you handle getting them into the team? What's the initial training and feedback? How are they going to learn your culture and what you expect of them? And what are the tools and resources that you're going to provide? When you are thoughtful about your onboarding, it shows them that you care about having them on the team and you're invested in their success. You're going to have a better trained employee. They're going to be more clear on their role. I have a client in distribution, huge distribution company. They're national. When they're hiring a supervisor, the first 3 months of that supervisor's training, they rotate through every job in the distribution center. From stacking the truck to unloading the truck to doing inventory, picking orders, packing boxes, working in customer service. When they step into their supervisor role, they understand how the entire company functions from a distribution standpoint. They understand how what inventory does impacts shipping, and how shipping, picking a wrong order, impacts the customer service people. So it really gives them a unique perspective as a supervisor. They probably do onboarding better than any company I've ever seen, actually. But there's a lot of clarity there. They're also more committed to the job and the employer, and you're going to help them integrate into the team. Retention tip. One of the best indicators for retention is whether or not your employee has friends at work. So if you have coworkers that you think of as friends, the chance that you're going to stay in that job are exponentially higher than if you feel sort of like a lone wolf. All right, planning for their training. What information do they need before their start date? What paperwork? What things do they need to bring with them their first day? Make sure they know that. I like to say, how could they have an awesome first day? Wouldn't it be cool if they went home at the end of their first day or their first week and said to their spouse or their family or whoever, oh my goodness, this is the best company I am ever going to work for. They are so awesome. This is going to be the best job ever. Like, what could you do in that first week that would make them have that kind of experience and build that kind of loyalty early on? What does this person need to learn and who will train them? Fun fact, your best employee at a task is not always your best teacher. Sometimes the person who's really excellent at operating that equipment or using that software, they're so good, they're so fast at it, they do it without thinking. And for them to slow down and teach someone is like, why? Why are you making me slow down to teach this guy? Look for the people on your team that have a natural bent towards training and mentorship. Even if they're maybe not your most skilled worker, they might be your best trainer. What should they learn first and last? What kind of knowledge needs to build? And lastly, what tools or resources do they need? One more funny story. I was on a sales call with a potential new customer for me. It was a smaller company, maybe about 20 employees. And the business owner said to me, I'm really sorry, I have Bill in here. It's his first day. I'm setting up his laptop while I talk to you. I was like, I feel like this might be part of why you're having trouble hiring. Maybe Bill's laptop could have been set up before he got here. Maybe he shouldn't be sitting here listening. The whole thing was kind of chaotic, to be honest. Great company, super nice, but it was pretty obvious to me maybe one of the challenges they were facing was that they were setting up someone's email address and accounts and logins while they're sitting there just watching. And she's on a sales call. So to wrap this up, candidate experience, interview with excellence, present the offer with warmth and enthusiasm, and then be really thoughtful about how you onboard so that they get a really strong start with your company. And to wrap the whole thing up, make sure you know what you're looking for before you get started. Don't use your job description as a job ad. Like, that is one thing. If you are struggling to get people excited about your job, fixing the marketing piece will be huge for you. Make sure you've thought through your interview process ahead of time. Do not fly by the seat of your pants. Candidates will notice. They will pay attention to the companies that were organized and thoughtful versus the ones that were chaotic. And you will lose some of your top candidates to your competitors. ask really good questions, make the most of every minute and every interaction you have with that candidate, be enthusiastic, and make sure you've planned for onboarding. You don't want to do all the work of hiring to mess up their first week on the job. So with that in mind, I do have, if any of you are interested, some interview questions my team has developed for different types of roles. If you go to that website, they're on there, you can print them off. I find it very helpful. You can sort of pull them out. There's maybe like 30 to 50 questions per role type, and you can pick out which ones you want ahead of your interview. So I think, if I'm mistaken, Don, I still have about 5-ish minutes if anyone has any questions.
What was that team player book you mentioned you wrote down?
The Ideal Team Player by Patrick Lencioni. Probably my favorite business book I ever read. It's actually about a construction company. So it's written as a fable. It's a super easy read. I got through it in like 2 or 3 days. But it's about a construction company trying to hire and the challenges they face. And they kind of narrow it down to a secret sauce, if you will, that a good team player should be someone humble, that admits that they make mistakes, that doesn't need all the credit, someone hungry, who's motivated to show up for work and contribute to the team, and also smart. And he doesn't mean like brain smarts, he means like, I can look at someone and be like, oh, what I said offended them, I need to repair this relationship, or, ooh, so-and-so seems like they're having a bad day, maybe I should check in with them. So he kind of lays that out beautifully, and he gives some interview strategies to sort of flesh out those types of traits. Good question. Any other questions? All right.
Well, thank you, Kristen. And she will be here over lunch. So if you have specific questions, awesome. I can personally attest to onboarding. So in my prior life, I built 3 marketing teams from scratch, and I learned a lot along the way. I got to tell you, onboarding is so critical to bringing somebody into your organization, and it is an excellent retention tool because they really get a sense of what your company is all about, but also they become far more productive. I had repeatedly people tell me, gosh, I would have thought so-and-so had been with your company for 2 years. And the person would have been there for 6 months because of the whole onboarding process. And I think because you guys are all engineering and very, very data-driven people, I'm telling you, the things she gave you is the science of hiring people, the science of recruiting, not just an art form. It is an art and a science, but I'm telling you, all those techniques work really well. So thank you.